Hello, and welcome to our sixth podcast. We take a new take on shadow AI. You will hear the three of us debate the value, the risk, and best practices for leveraging shadow AI. I also know the podcast with a new theory, for me at least, on the reason and potential concerns shadow AI highlights for an organization.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to I think it's our seventh podcast, actually.
Ooh, lucky sevens.
Yeah, so today we had started our journey with you all talking about shadow AI and the MIT report that came out in August. And then as we started to look at the new year, we decided that this was a good topic to revisit. There are a lot of different stats and about shadow AI, people using AI at work, using it at home. There's a number of examples of attorneys who've been cited by courts and all for using cases and all that were cited by ChatGPT or whatever that didn't really exist. And I thought it was important enough, and we all did, to revisit this idea that most people I know are using AI at home or they're using it on the sideline at work. And what does that really mean to an enterprise and an organization? Is there any upside? Is there any value or not? And I think where I'd like to start, Campbell, is with you because we were talking before the podcast about the potential value of shadow AI and let you talk a little bit more about that. And that'll be a good way, Mike, for you and I to engage as well.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So let me start. I actually brought this up, I think, I don't know, in the last podcast or the podcast before, but when we used to do business value assessments, ROI assessments for organizations to validate the investment in whether it was ERP, client server, internet-based, SaaS offerings. One of the things that we always did is we would focus on understanding the end user. And what we identified was this thing called cheat sheets. So everybody at their desk had documented ways to get around the bottlenecks, the broken processes, the arduous policies within an organization to get their work done in a more effective way. And what I find shadow AI is doing is that it's another form of employees trying to be as productive as possible. So what that really means is that there's a friction between what it actually means to get your work done as an employee within an organization, countered against what the enterprise IT or lines of business are actually deploying in order to be secure and compliant. So there's a friction that occurs. However, there's a lot of risk. I know that, that it's got a lot of downside, but there is upside to it. And again, we're discussing, I mean, if we go back to that MIT study that everybody focused on the 95% failure rate, but what I had highlighted was that 5% succeeded because of deep vertical integration. But the other thing that they found was that, 90%, like there was a higher ROI of productivity when the employees were actually using shadow AI. So if they were going out and using their own personal tools to be more productive, that's where AI was actually boosting the productivity gain, not in the formal systems because they were being too constrained by all of the major factors that an organization deals with: compliance, security, cyber risk, etc. But I think the key stat that I want to start with, is 68% of employees use free tier AI tools like ChatGPT via their personal accounts, with 57% inputting sensitive data, demonstrating that there's a massive adoption of AI for productivity gain, countered with a huge risk. So that's where there's good news, but there's also bad news. And I've got some other additional thoughts on how you can sort of harness this shadow AI. Those are my kickoff thoughts.
Mike's waiting on me, I think. So what I thought was reading up this morning a little bit more is I saw the term bottom up innovation. I think that's a good way to put this. I think it really mimics the internet and even early client server, where people were using the internet at home to do things, and then they came to the office and wanted to know why they couldn't whatever the tools were that were available. And that really, if you look at that is the tip of an iceberg that led to standardization of communication and a lot of things that changed beyond just internet. I think if you look at the early PC era, people were getting a PC at home, spending a fortune, and wanting to know why they didn't have that at their fingertips in the office. So I think this continues that pattern of doing that. And then I saw one other comment that just as these other technologies, it'll drive demand at the enterprise level as well. And I have a feeling Mike is going to tell us on the other side of this, which is what's the underbelly of using AI and the shadows, if you will.
Yeah, you know me well, Mr. Silverman. There's a lot on my mind on this. First of all, the usage or prevalence of shadow AI is not new to the enterprise, right? We went through this with bring your own apps, bring your own phone. Like here we are again. This is what I feel like I'm talking about this on every podcast, right? Nothing new. And you shared some great articles. I was reading them last night. There may or may not have been tequila involved. We'll leave that aside. But even the analysts I felt like I'm reading these articles and they're like, bring your own app and replace it with shadow AI. They're saying the exact same things. There's no new good advice here for enterprises. So I'm going to try, not that I claim to be smarter than the analysts. You need an employee handbook that has rules for usage of of AI tools. And in those rules, by the way, I'm at a educational event, higher education event this week in Washington, D.C. And there's a whole bunch, obviously you would think a whole bunch of conversation about AI, and shadow AI is in the higher education or education in the student body. If you don't have rules and you don't have penalties, people are going to do this, and there are going to be more catastrophic results than businesses are probably comprehending right now. I am guilty of it. I admit it. I'm given the parameters, but in order for me to actually do my job, I have to use non-sanctioned AI tools. I'm not releasing any secret information, but I have to do research on something other than using something other than Gemini Notebook. Full stop.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that's one of the reasons the title of this is to bring it out of the shadows. I think there has to be a reality check that you're not going to stop it. And so what you really need to do, to your point, you need a handbook, but you also need to open the door to communication. And if, I redid the introduction to my class on Udemy. One of the things I really I spent a few minutes on top down versus bottom up. And the leadership needs to come back and say, we know you're using these tools, or somehow to come up out it and say, let's reward innovation. In other words, let's reward you telling us that you've been misbehaving to a point. So you start to learn what the behavior is of your team. There's a KPMG report that I cited.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is they, even though organizations have policies against it, people are using it anyway. And that would tell me that they have policies, but they haven't explained why they exist in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
if you have one of the things that I really think about is if you take like a newsletter or some kind of approach where people are rewarded for sharing,
Yeah.
then you start to get the visibility, and you also see the value that's bringing forward, right? And so if you use that to bring the positive out, then you get the opportunity to have the caution and the concerns that need to be there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I disagree, Mike, on the punitive side of it. And I think, Brian, you just alluded to something, because again, if I'm going to reflect back again on a little bit of history, but I think, Mike, as you agree, history repeats itself in technology. IBM IBM in the 90s. IBM was on the verge of collapse. They turned and embraced grassroots innovation. So from Brian, to your point, from bottom up, they were embracing initiatives, technology use, processes, approaches, et cetera, and they embraced it, and they sort of were able to formalize and support this grassroots revival within IBM, and that was a turning point within IBM in the 90s for other factors too. The other one, look at Siemens. Siemens back in early 2000s when knowledge management was the buzzword. What they did is they incorporated a reward system so that if an employee was able to share best practices or an approach that was innovative, they were actually rewarded with, I don't know, Siemens, points so that they could get a phone or they could get certain things from within the organization, which plays into, yes, I agree that there needs to be a handbook, there needs to be change management, there fundamentally needs to be education. Employees need to be educated on the risks, the use, and the impact that they may have if they use AI inappropriately. I mean, if they're going to go home and use ChatGPT and unfortunately upload an Excel spreadsheet with corporate IP, they need to know the impact of that. So I think education is fundamental. I think being able to not necessarily accelerate shadow AI, but at least embrace it and adopt it as sort of an edge innovation. And then I think, I've got other thoughts on some ways to be able to move forward, but I think focusing on reinforcement, engagement, communication, to your point, Brian, I think is critical to make it
Yeah,
successful.
I think the key is a reward first and then the warning later. I think part of it is truthfully the generations behind us are more actively looking at ways to speed up work to their credit and to get into other things, I think. And I think if you give them a reward for sharing what they're doing, then you start to get that honest communication coming from the leadership. Then you start to see it. And I think the other part of it is there are going to be pockets of people that are doing things. Maybe they did upload that spreadsheet to Chat GPT, but they got 3 new ideas that have, grown sales in their territory. Real quick, one of my questions is if they are using AI to increase their attainment or whatever, in theory, you're paying them for it, right? Through commissions or whatever, you're reinforcing it. So why not figure out a way to bring it out from the shadows? Now, I think it's a good opportunity. We're sort of balancing the reward versus the negative or the bad use from Mike's point of view. But there are risks involved, right, in sharing intellectual property. If there's I saw an article early this morning about, some healthcare people are sharing healthcare data to get analysis, but you can imagine how disastrous that could be for whoever the information that they're sharing. So trying to there's a balance here between rewarding innovation that wasn't sanctioned and then the penalties. And we will include in the webpage for this podcast the links that I shared with Campbell and Mike yesterday. But there's a cyber news survey, which is interesting. It's 1,000 people. I don't know how statistically significant it is, but they found most executives and senior management are the ones doing shadow AI. Maybe that's why they don't want to contain it, because they don't want to admit it either. But we really need to bring it out of the shadows, and people need to really, and I think coming back to it, Mike, if you had a handbook and then along that you had a newsletter to talk about innovation and started to, if you brought this negative out of the shadows and started to have visibility to it, the upside might improve greatly, don't you think?
Yeah, so I'm agreeing with Campbell. I agree with what you said. I agree with Brian. I'm going to try to be maybe a little bit more clear. And this does come down to communication, and it's like we jumped into AI. The population en masse without education. So the issue that I take with shadow AI is that we have not told people, executives, line workers, students, why it's bad to do it. They don't understand. Using the Excel spreadsheet is a great example. They don't understand, and I know I'm being very generalist here, but I'm confident in my generalization. We haven't told them why they shouldn't do that, that where that data goes if they do.
Mm.
It's not like I'm doing something on on my computer and it stays on my hard drive. Right? The risk to a business is massive. Putting health information into a prompt could be catastrophic. It could lead to massive lawsuits. And I'm speaking in hyperbole because people don't understand this. And and I'll tell you, like, even in one of the situations that I'm involved in where we have this lockdown system and an AI solution that we're told this is our AI solution. People admitted that they're using other solutions to work around it, and they're just doing it on their phone or on their private laptop, and they don't understand why that's bad. So I don't believe we can stop it any more than we can stop people from speeding. But people also understand this is why you shouldn't speed, is why you shouldn't drive fast, and here's the penalty when you get caught. So in the lack of explanation that says, here's why it's bad, and here's what happens if we catch you doing it, people are going to continue to do it. Yes, there will be great innovation that comes out of it. I don't deny that. But it needs to be fenced in. This is still like we're not day one on this. Maybe we're day two or day three. But we have not done a good job of explaining to the people, you know, the whatever 70%, 72% of the population that's using AI tools, exactly what the tool can and cannot do and what's happening behind the scenes. It's not a magic box.
So I agree with that. I'm actually sent in two directions at once.
Okay.
First thing is in the KPMG study that said that 58% of the people doing this are using the response and not validating the content. So that's problem number one. But I have a feeling, Campbell, I can send you in a different direction, and that is this is actually an infrastructure problem first and not an AI problem. And that is they don't have easy access to data. They don't have easy access to the right tools to leverage the information of their business to get the results for their job. So they take that spreadsheet home or they use a tool online and they upload data that they know where it is and then they move forward. And this is showing, I think, that iceberg view that AI, and truthfully, not to beat my own drum again, but it's also a language problem that we lump all AI into generative AI and its problems. But if the infrastructure were right, they had access to the data and sanction tools, they'd have much less reason to go home and do something rogue or do something even in the office rogue with these shadow AI tools.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think. I mean, there's a fun. Well, I'll reflect on. There's an. I guess some people may be aware of it. It's called three lines of defense, right? You sort of put three layers. The first and foremost layer that you have to put in place is at the executive, at the board level, at the executive level of an organization, who owns it, and what is sort of the guiding principles. And then obviously there's a second layer where you're sort of monitoring, data observability, usage, et cetera. And again, what I would say is, what I think where certain things are going to succeed potentially is giving almost like sandbox environments. So to prototype a sandbox environment with, like, let's say all the toys, AI toys that individuals may want to use, study it and analyze it and try to get a better perspective on it from a pilot point of view so that you can clearly see where there's potentially violations and or innovation, so negative and positive, from a sandbox type of an approach. Because I think IT, enterprise architects, they're familiar with the concept of a sandbox. So if you do it in a sandbox environment, understand the nature of it, incorporate better, training points of view, it'll be like annual training that all employees have to go through. And I think it does resonate with an employee when they go through, in compliance or whatever type training that they need to do. But the bottom line is that it's it is a fundamental challenge to the baseline IT and enterprise IT cybersecurity aspects that we have today. I think just being able to formulate a sort of an edge approach, an innovation approach, sandbox is one idea that would allow it to be able to be constrained to a certain point. I don't know if I'm answering the question clearly, Brian. So
I think you are, and we've got about 3 minutes. But actually, this conversation has taken me into something that I think my recommendation is to bring it out of the shadow as much as you can and get people talking about it. And I think what I really came through in the last 20 minutes, leadership and the IT and the business organization that are focused on AI need to understand why these tools are valued to the user and what it's doing to why the organization, why it made the employee more productive, especially those that KPMG study said 41% of these organizations have sanctioned tools, but people, Mike, to your point, are going rogue to use other tools. So I would say bring it out of the shadow, um, look at why it's valued, and see what you need to do to um, update your infrastructure or your strategy to make it more optimal for the user or the employee to use the sanction tools and not the ones that go rogue. Mike, do you want to have a comment? And then we'll let Campbell wrap this
Yeah,
up.
I'll be really quick. And this is to the, any of the enterprise leaders or business leaders that tune into this. Write it in crayon. Be so clear with people as to why the rules exist, what is acceptable and allowed, what is not, and what happens if you decide you're going to go rogue. Period.
Yeah. And Campbell, you get the last word.
yeah, so just two counterpoints that I want to sort of highlight. So Gartner estimates by 2030 there will 40% of all or enterprises will have a AI incident or breach. And if you look at the numbers at the SMB layer, it costs an SMB on average $600,000 for a breach. So that's a lot of money. There's a financial downside to that, and also from just the notoriety and sort of branding. What I'm going to say is shadow AI isn't a fringe issue. It's a mainstream reality, and your workforce is already experimenting with AI to solve real problems within your organization. And the choice is whether you turn that liability into an asset and be able to encapsulate that distributed innovation in a way that makes best sense. And there is a way to do that.
All right. Well, thank you all, and thank you to the audience. And I'm going to stop this and then